against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us.
The Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, the holy trinity of superhero movies. But do these movies still hold up? Or are they stuck in that weird pre-MCU phase of superhero movies that are really bad? Well, with this video I plan on figuring that out. So I rewatched all the Spider-Man movies back to back to answer that question. Spider-Man is very cheesy, and personally, I enjoy cheesy. It gives more of a distinct personality, honestly more memorable. Tobey Maguire's performance isn't that great. The opening narration done by him is just horrible. I know a lot of people take issue with Peter being wimpy and weak looking, but isn't that kind of the point? I also know a lot of people mention Peter's age and how he doesn't look like a high schooler, which is a completely fair complaint, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, he does graduate high school halfway through the first movie. So it's not like the movies are really trying to convince you that this is what a high schooler looks like. And then, we meet cinema's best villain in history, William Dafoe as the Green Goblin. Even before he gets the Green Goblin serum stuck in him, he acts like this alien trying to imitate what human behavior is. He seems really into the role. His origin is that the weapons he's making for the military aren't done yet, and it will go back to formula if he doesn't hurry up. So, like an idiot, decides to test the formula on himself.
It's cold.
It goes horribly wrong and then he dies. This movie is great, and if you disagree, we just can't be friends. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules. The nice thing about this film is that the pacing is very back and forth. We see what happens in Peter's story.
Yeah. Big change.
Then Green Goblins. And it goes back and forth like that, with fight scenes mixed in between. One thing that's always bothered me personally is Uncle Ben's "with great power comes great responsibility" speech. It's a good speech and definitely lays the groundwork for the rest of the trilogy, but the context behind it doesn't really add up, because Uncle Ben is upset with Peter for fighting the bully, despite the fact that the bully was attacking Peter and Peter was just defending himself. The Green Goblin costume looks like something out of Power Rangers. William Dafoe dresses up as an elderly woman inside a burning building to just surprise attack Peter. He has sleep gas in his arms. Basically, this whole movie is carried by William Dafoe. And that's not to say the core characters are bad either. Despite what everyone says, I really like Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker. There's more to his character in Spider-Man 2 specifically, so I'll get more into that later. The unironic best part is J.K. Simmons as Jonah Jameson. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that. In the same way Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man, J.K. Simmons is JJ.
Several other smaller...
Get on with it, you moron! What?
Your blood pressure, Mr. Jameson. Your wife told me to tell you to watch the anger.
You tell my wife!
Thank you.
This movie does a great job at laying the groundwork for the rest of the trilogy, and stands well in its own right. The fight scenes aren't bad either, but I wouldn't say they are necessarily good. The effects aren't very good, which, yeah, it came out in 2002. But plenty of movies before that had a lesser budget and worse technology, and still look great by today's standards. The final fight in this movie is William Dafoe holding a literal crate of children in one hand and Mary Jane in the other. Where did he find these children? This movie is insane. I do like the fight with just Peter and the Green Goblin, even if it is unintentionally hilarious.
Godspeed, Spider-Man.
Oh.
Peter decides to keep his identity a secret, and with great power comes great responsibility. Now this is how you do a sequel. A great sequel needs 3 elements: new memorable characters, interesting new character arcs, and leaving an impact. Spider-Man 2 introduces Doc Ock, who a lot of people, myself included, consider the best villain in this trilogy. The main plot of Spider-Man 2 is whether Peter should continue to be Spider-Man or not. At what point should he start putting himself first? He can't live his own life and is forced to use his power because with great power comes great responsibility. It's a really interesting internal conflict, and I love the way it is visually shown through Peter's loss of powers. The struggle is shown even more with his falling out with his friends and family. All Harry talks about is how Spider-Man killed his dad. Mary Jane is being heavily manipulative to Peter because he rejected her in the first movie. Seriously, I understand being disappointed. He turned you down. But what is your problem? You're dating the astronaut guy just to make Peter jealous. Literally in every scene throughout the movie where Peter and MJ argue, she then does stuff with the astronaut guy just to mess with Peter. It doesn't even really feel like a Spider-Man movie as much as a Peter Parker movie. Spider-Man 2 as well left a major impact not just within the trilogy, but impacted superhero movies to this day. X-Men as well played a huge part, but the Spider-Man movies made more at the box office. These movies are what most likely shaped the MCU. This movie as well is a lot funnier, intentionally, than Spider-Man 1.
Pizza time.
Now, as much as I love Doc Ock, he is very similar to Green Goblin. He's just a more serious version of that character. Effects in this movie are very much a step up from Spider-Man 1. The arms Doc Ock uses are partially practical, which I thought was extremely impressive. This movie also has a very similar pacing to Spider-Man 1, although the main difference is that the Peter scenes are longer than the Doc Ock scenes. I also feel obligated to mention the Evil Dead scene. For a PG-13 movie, the way the arms are presented is pretty scary, which is pretty impressive to build this amount of tension for not showing any blood or on-screen death. The action throughout the movie has a very good sense of build-up. It starts with Peter being late to deliver a pizza. You know, you might be saying a cap there, but trust me, it gets crazier than that. Catching criminals, Doc Ock robbing a bank. Ow! The Evil Dead reference, the train, and then the final fight. When Peter stops being Spider-Man, his life is better. He gets better grades, he tries to fix his relationships. Peter tells Aunt May about his part in Uncle Ben's death, and while a lot of people don't like the way Aunt May reacts, it's a normal response. She's shocked by this revelation, and expecting her to instantly be okay with this wouldn't be normal. I don't know what it is about trains and action scenes, but it just makes the action so much better. I separate this from the rest of the review because of how much I love it. I probably don't need to tell you this. The music in this scene really builds up the tension, along with the metallic sounds of the arms. The fact that civilians are constantly in danger, the way the train breaks apart as Peter tries to slow it down, then when Peter does stop the train, everyone grabs to save him. I didn't mention in Spider-Man 1 portion of the video, but I love the sense of community these two movies have. The small clips of people talking about Spider-Man,
like a spider, he looks like a bug. But we should all just give him one big hug.
or to the final fight where the boat catches a crate of children and people throw stuff at the Green Goblin.
You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us!
All that comes together in this scene. Every time I watch this scene, I get swept up in the moment. They all promise not to tell anyone who Spider-Man really is. Then the part where Doc Ock comes back to steal the moment away, only to have people stand up for Peter.
You want to get to him, you got to go through me.
And me.
Me too.
After Spider-Man gets kidnapped by Doc Ock, Harry then finds out Peter is Spider-Man.
There are bigger things happening here than me and you.
I know that people make fun of these movies for the dialogue, but when it delivers hard. The final climax of the movie, while it definitely has its highlights, the action peaked in that train scene. Mary Jane finding out that Peter is Spider-Man was handled so well. Doc Ock's sacrifice is great. Mary Jane runs away from her wedding to be with Peter.
Tell her not to open the caviar.
And talks about how she understands that he's Spider-Man and it won't affect their relationship, but then lets it affect the relationship with Spider-Man 3. Okay, before we start, let's get all out of our system. Okay, now that that's out of the way, I'm not about to say something controversial. I actually like this movie. Is it structured poorly? Yes, no doubt about it. Anyone that's seen this movie can tell you that. Are the performances bad at parts? Yes. Is this movie hilarious? Of course it is. See, the Spider-Man trilogy is kind of like the original trilogy of Star Wars for me. The first movies are goofy, but set up the universe really well. The second is more serious, introducing new characters and story ideas for our characters. Then the third just returns to being goofy, but with moments of really good character building. And when watching all three of these movies back to back, it really isn't that much of a tonal shift. Especially when Spider-Man 2 carries a lot of the comedic elements from 1 over. Spider-Man 3 doesn't feel any more goofy than 1 or parts of Spider-Man 2. The plot of this movie is that Harry is angry because Peter killed his dad, so there's a fight scene between Harry and Peter. And this is a great way to start your film. We know both of these characters won't die, since 1, the movie just started, and 2, because they are both main characters. To kill Harry here would be pointless. So the movie has the ingenious idea to give Harry amnesia, the best plot device ever. He gains this amnesia after the funniest end to a fight ever, second only to his father. So after that, Spider-Man does a Spider-Man thing and Mary Jane gets jealous because she isn't doing well on Broadway. Now Peter tries to relate to Mary Jane, but goes about it in the wrong way. When Mary Jane talks about how the paper was trash-talking her performance, instead of listening, Peter tells Mary Jane how to feel and what to do. Peter lets his fame get to his head. He ends up kissing Gwen Stacy. There is also the introduction of 2 new villains. Sandman, a criminal who steals to pay for his sick daughter when he falls into this science experiment thing.
There's a change in the silicon mass.
It's probably a bird. It'll fly away when we fire it up.
A bird. What kind of birds land in this thing? I also really love the scene of Sandman being created. The effects are honestly still really good, and with no dialogue and just the amazing score to convey all the emotion needed. After Spider-Man loses Sandman, he is then told that Sandman was actually involved in Uncle Ben's murder. We also get introduced to Eddie Brock, who's a really great foil to Peter. Then the Venom goo touches Spider-Man's suit and makes it black and edgy. A lot of people have this misconception that the Venom goo just makes you evil, but that's not how it works. The movie even says it just amplifies your bad characteristics.
It amplifies characteristics of its host.
Peter has a high ego now and was very angry when hearing about Sandman for the first time. So the Venom goo amplifies this to the point where Peter thinks he actually killed someone. And he doesn't feel remorse about it. He happily tells Aunt May the news, but Aunt May is shocked, knowing that Spider-Man would never kill anyone. And if we were being honest, it's pretty obvious Aunt May knows Peter is Spider-Man, just from the garage scene in Spider-Man 2. Harry then magically cures his amnesia and becomes just like his father. His scenes are some of the best in the movie.
How's the pie?
So good.
Peter, with this knowledge, decides to kill Harry. He doesn't even look back to see if he's okay, which is a huge contrast to the fight scene earlier. Then we get these funny bits that you've all seen, so we don't really need to waste time talking about this. Eddie Brock then prays for the death of Peter Parker at church. Peter is trying to get rid of the Venom goo after he hit Mary Jane. The score playing with this scene really adds to the entire moment. The only thing to really complain about is that the Venom effect does not look great, which is shocking to me since Sandman looks so fantastic. The thing is, while I like Eddie Brock in this movie, when he gets his suit, he becomes so uninteresting. It doesn't amplify any of his other previous characteristics, as he really didn't have any, so he's just evil now.
I like being bad. It makes me happy.
Maybe this movie had 1 villain, even 2 could work, but there just wasn't enough time to develop this. Venom somehow finds Sandman, and they agree to kidnap Mary Jane to get Spider-Man's attention. As creative as this whole trilogy is, I'm honestly giving this movie a lot of slack. They really did just reuse the same climax 3 times, so. Peter tries to talk to Harry into saving MJ, but Harry's even more depressed now because of his face. Then this random butler comes out of nowhere and says,
"The blade that pierced his body came from his glider. I know you're trying to defend your father's honor, but there's no question that he died by his own hand."
You're a real asshole for not saying anything sooner. You couldn't even say it before Peter left. I really like the way that Peter and Harry team up to save MJ. Venom and Sandman, aside from capturing MJ, don't team up to fight Harry and Peter. It's just a 2v1 fight. Also, is this Harry's signature move? He does it in every scene he's in. I swear it has to be a punchline or something. The way Harry sacrifices himself and dies the same way his father did. Sandman talking about his involvement with Uncle Ben. While not bad, the death just doesn't make any sense. I really love the reincorporation of forgiveness. Just like how Aunt May forgave Peter for his part in Uncle Ben's death. Peter forgives Sandman for his part in Uncle Ben's death. The final scene in the movie where Peter goes to the club where MJ is so underrated. Even though Peter wants MJ, he knows he didn't treat her fair and doesn't deserve her. They hug and reconcile, but aren't seeing each other anymore. The original Sam Raimi trilogy has such a special charm to it. Whether it be the cheesy moments, to the old costumes, the dated effects, the over-the-top or underwhelming acting, the incredible, fantastic score by Danny Elfman, which adds so much emotion in the movie. That is completely integral to the overall structure. The highs and lows of this trilogy are all enjoyable to me. Honestly, I can't be in a bad mood watching these movies. It's just not possible. You can feel the care ooze out of the screen as you watch. I genuinely recommend it if you haven't checked these out in a while, you do. I promise you will not be disappointed.